So we have a big topic today, which is socialism, which is very popular right now, which is fascinating to me that after all of the ups and downs, socialism, which has had some challenges in the past, is now suddenly of great interest. I want to start by discussing part of the reason I think it's very popular, and that's because all of us grew up under socialism. We all grew up in socialist organizations, and that organization is called the family. In my family, I don't use markets or money to allocate goods. I don't charge my children rent. I tax myself all the time and give them money. When there are 3 cookies left, it's dinner, and there are only 3 cookies around for dessert, and I have 4 children, and everybody wants a cookie. I don't hold an auction, which I think in Hebrew is mechira pumbit. Is that an auction? So I don't hold an auction. I just divide the cookies up equally and I try to make sure that every child gets an equal share. I don't give the children who get the best grades in school, I don't give them the best bedroom. I don't use incentives. I don't use prices. I don't use money the way an economy uses money or that markets use money. And I think, tell me if I have this right, in Hebrew, the family is be'ivrit shivyoni. Is that the right word, Hananel?
Yes.
Egalitarian in English, egalitarian, shivyoni. Now, because we grow up as socialists in our family as children, we have a love for it. And it is a very wonderful system in a small group when there's love, when there's ahava. There's 2 things that make socialism work in the family. There's ahava and there's information. I know a lot about every one of my children. I know what they've been through each day. So it could be if there's only 1 cookie left and I know one of my children's had a hard day, I might give them the cookie even though it's not, quote, fair, because I know what they need. So in a small group, socialism works very well. And the economist, Hayek, says that we have a natural urge, and I think he's right, to take the system of the family and create a much larger family for the society as a whole. And he says that's a very dangerous urge, but it's a very natural urge. So one of the reasons, and let me just say one more thing. In Israel, we have wonderful experiments in Shivyoni. We have the kibbutz, which was, somewhat popular 40 and 50 and 60 years ago, not so popular now, but it's fine if there is a small group of people who want to live together and share things equally, everyone with the same standard of living. That's a good thing if that's what they want. But to impose it on the whole country is not effective, I believe. I encourage you to read a book on the kibbutz by Yael Ne'eman. The title is Hayinu Ha'atid, I think, in Hebrew. In English, it's We Were the Future. Hayinu Ha'atid. It's a really powerful book on the challenges of growing up in a socialist kibbutz. So in a national level, this idea of egalitarianism, shivyoni, is not so effective. In fact, I would argue it's harmful and dangerous. But what's happened is that in America, and I think in Israel as well, people are not happy with the results of the economic system. They want something else. And sometimes they say socialism, and what they mean is something different, something like capitalism, but without the problems. And I want to say in the beginning that there is a fundamental question of whether the problems we see in Israel today, the problems we see in America today, are due to too much capitalism or possibly not enough. As I suggested yesterday, Monday, I think a lot of for example, I know in Israel and in America as well, people are very upset about the high price of housing. in Tel Aviv, Yerushalayim, in America, in New York, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Boston, the price of housing has gone up and up and up. And what's the reason for that? And I think the reason is that the government has imposed restrictions on building new housing. So the market for housing is not allowed to work the way it should. So how do we fix that? Well, I know in Israel and also in the United States, there's a temptation to subsidize housing, to give people money to pay for their expensive housing. The problem is that pushes up the price of housing again. It's not the right way to solve it, in my view. In my view, you need to solve it by building more houses. But what has to be faced is that there are problems with the economic system in the United States. There are problems with the economic system in Israel. The challenge is, what is the cause of those problems? And how do we make it better? Now, when people say the word socialism, people who don't like socialism will say, oh, socialism, that's like North Korea. That's socialism. Or Cuba. But people who like socialism, that's not what they have in mind. They have in mind something more like Sweden or Norway or Denmark. And I just want to say, it's very important to remember that Sweden and Norway and Denmark and Israel all have a very strong and vibrant capitalist part of their economy. There's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of creativity that is allowed. The government's not running the economy. So when people, I think, are talking about socialism today in America and possibly in Israel, you'll tell me, what they have in mind is what we need is we need to soften and improve the outcomes that come from capitalism. We need to tax the rich more and give that money to the poor, okay? So I think that's the case that people are typically making. And the question is that going to make the problems that we face better or worse? So what I want to do today is to show you that a lot of the data, a lot of the information, a lot of the analysis that is done has problems with the statistics, with the data. And I think some of the most pessimistic conclusions, certainly in America, and you can tell me also about Israel, but certainly in America, many of the analyses, many of the articles, many of the charts, many of the graphs, they use very particular numbers to make their case, but they don't look at all the numbers. And if you look at some numbers, some of the data suggests that the system is broken. The American economic system is broken. The middle class, the average person can't make any progress. All the people at the top 1% get all the gains. And I want to show you today that a lot of that analysis is, what's the right word? Flawed, imperfect, maybe not accurate. So I want to walk you through some of the depressing, pessimistic analyses and show you that it's more complicated than it looks at first glance. Okay, so this is the kind of chart that gets shown in American media all the time to show that the average worker is making no progress in America. So you have to be very careful when you look at data on income. You have to make a distinction, let's see if I can get this right, between the average and the median. So in particular, the median, I think in Ivrit is Chatzion, correct? Chatzion? That's the median. With the Chatzion, half of the numbers are bigger and half are smaller. It's the midpoint. And then there's the mamutza, the average, which is you take all the numbers, you divide by the number of observations, and that's the average. With income, who is the richest person in Israel right now, Hananel? Do we know?
share listen usually. Yeah. Share listen. That's the name.
Okay, so take that person. Let's take that person. Suppose he came into the room, your room right now, into the Neve Ilan Hotel. What would happen to the average income in the room?
Price.
Would go way up, enormously higher, average wealth or income. But it wouldn't be a very good measure of the typical average person in the room. It would, in fact, no one in the room would make anything close to the mamutza. There would be one person, the richest person, who makes more, and then there would be everyone else who makes a lot less. So if we wanted to know how the people in the room are doing economically, and there's a very rich person in the room, we would probably use the median, right? We would not use the average. We would use the chatzion, not the mamutza, right? Because otherwise it would not be a very good measure. So this number, this chart, can we still see the chart?
Yes.
So the chart is an average. So you have to be careful with an average. But in this case, it's only certain kinds of workers. It is taken out the people who are at the very top, the managers and the CEOs, the executives. So it's the average. It's actually a good number, even though it's the average, it's a good number because it doesn't have the high income people at the top who would distort the measure like they would when I gave you the example of a person, very wealthy person coming in the room. So what happened to average hourly earnings between 1973 and 2015 in the United States? You see what the chart says? What does the chart say? Has it gone up, gone down, stayed the same? What would you say?
About the same.
About the same. Well, that's very depressing because between 1973 and 2015, the US economy got much, much bigger. Per capita is much bigger. I forget the number exactly. It might be double. But if the average person is the same in 2015 as in 1973, that means the average person got none of the gains. And that means the system is broken. It's unfair. It's horrible. But there's a problem, which is that this particular measure of inflation, when you look at people over time, you can't just look at their income because you have to correct for inflation. Because if all the prices are twice as high, if your income is twice as high in 2015 as it was in 1973, but all the prices are twice as high, then you've made no progress. What we care about is the amount of things you can buy, okay? So if you correct for inflation, what this chart says is that after you correct for inflation, people in 2014 actually, couldn't buy, they actually could buy less in 2014 than they could buy in 1973, 40 years earlier. I mean, that's so depressing. It's unbelievably depressing. It means that the average person, if these numbers are correct, I don't think they are, but if these numbers are correct, it means the average person made no progress, none. And it means the system is broken and we need something different. But this picture is not exactly correct. So let's look at a richer picture. So it turns out there are different measures of inflation. That particular one happens to give you that result of negative 6%, 1973. It's actually to 2013. Here's a different measure. So now, can you see that picture now, a different picture?
Yes.
With two graphs?
Yeah.
So the one on the left uses one measure of inflation, and the one on the right uses a different measure. The difference is huge. On the one on the left, it says the average person's fallen behind over these 40 years. The one on the right says, actually, they've gone up 17%. This is a big difference. So which one's right? Well, I would argue neither one is right. It's very hard to measure inflation over time. And in particular, when quality is improving, It's extremely hard to measure inflation accurately because what you got with your money isn't the same. And I'm going to show you now a short video to try to capture that. What I do in this video is try to capture the fact that when you measure inflation over time, which prices over time, which is trying to measure inflation to correct for changes in the standard of living, it's going to be very difficult to get it correct when there's changes in quality. So let's try to see this. That's me. I know it's hard to believe. Can everybody still see it?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. This is before I got old and gray. A lot of people claim the average American hasn't made much economic progress over the last 30 to 40 years. In the first 3 episodes of this series, I tried to show there's more to the story. The average American and the poor got richer as the economy grew. But I think those gains, if anything, are even bigger than the cheery numbers I shared. That's because all the attempts to measure economic progress, gloomy or cheerful, require an accurate measure of inflation. Measuring inflation is harder than you might think. Here's a Sony color TV from the early 1970s, 21-inch screen, about $600. And here's a Sony today that's $500. So it looks like the price of the TV fell by about 16%. But the $500 Sony is more than twice as big. Does that mean the price is 32% lower today because I get twice as much for my money? That old TV only got a few channels. Today's gets about 1,000. Does it break? You can play video games on it. The picture's about a zillion times sharper. And what about the 65-inch Sony that's $1,800 today? Is that 3 times the price of a 1970s TV? Would you consider the 1970s Sony a bargain? And then again, I watch almost all my TV shows on my laptop. So is the price of a TV 0 now compared to the past? So just how much your price has gone up or down? It's really hard to measure precisely when the quality of what we buy is improving rapidly. Ironically, when goods and services get better over time, the more likely it is that inflation will be overestimated and changes in the standard of living underestimated. It might look like we're standing still or falling behind when economic life is actually getting a lot better. To get the full picture, behind this problem, let's use a little bit of economics imagination. Imagine you have the chance to go shopping today with your current income, but you can pay the prices of 1973. Now, according to the PCE, a commonly used price... How to know?
Yes.
How's it working?
Good.
Can everybody hear me right now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so what I'm going to do here is a really fun thought experiment. I'm going to let you use your income today and use 1973 prices, which would be fantastic because they were so low. There's been so much inflation since 1973. You should be many times richer. You should be able to buy a lot more stuff. But the problem is I'm going to make you buy 1973 goods also, the quality of goods available in 1973. But according to the PCE, which is a measure of inflation, you should be many times richer if you could buy 1973 prices with your income today. But I'm going to argue, and I think you'll agree, that that would not make you many times richer. You would actually be poorer because the quality of the goods are so bad in 1973, which is to say that when we look at inflation to try to correct for the fact that prices are higher, we're not measuring it correctly. So let's continue. Prices today are about 5 times higher than in 1973. If that's right, whatever your income is today, letting you pay 1973 prices means you should be about 5 times richer. There's a catch. When you go shopping in this imaginary world, you don't just get the 1973 prices, you also get the 1973 goods and services. So when you go to buy a car, the Honda Civic they show you is the 1973 model. It's a bit stripped down, sure, but it's only $1,973, really. Clever marketing back then. Or you could splurge and get yourself a Corvette for under $7,000. The Corvette of 1973 only got about 14 miles per gallon.
But that's okay. Gas is only 36 cents a gallon. Your house is going to be a lot cheaper. Healthcare is cheaper. So is your kid's education. Stanford tuition is less than $3,000 a year. That frees up a lot of money to buy more stuff and load up your cart. You can buy anything you want from the 1973 Sears catalog. Polyester pants, the same as those worn here by golfing great Johnny Miller, only $16.95. You don't have to settle for the 21-inch TV. You can easily afford the biggest color television in the catalog, a giant 25-incher for $719.
So again, the biggest TV available in 1973 was 25 inches, and it was $719. $719 gets you an unbelievable TV right now. So is it really true that the price hasn't changed? No, it's a better television. You get more television.
Only gets 10 channels, and the picture's not too sharp. There's one other catch. I'm only going to let you buy goods and services that were available in 1973. You can't have any of today's goods that middle-class consumers enjoy if they weren't available back then. I'm not talking about yachts or caviar, but the everyday goods that most Americans can afford. So no smartphone, no rear view camera when you're backing up your car, no GPS, no airbags in that bargain price Corvette, no Waze to get you home, but you can buy a map for next to nothing at that gas station, charging 36 cents a gallon. No Google, Facebook, Twitter, Yelp, and no educational economics videos on YouTube, or videos on how to carve a turkey, play the Malfouf rhythm, or learn the difference between the United Kingdom, Britain, and England. You know, Fortnite or Minecraft or whatever's the hot game when you end up watching this video. But there's a pinball machine at the convenience store in the corner, and it's only 25 cents a game. You can play it for hours. Heck, with your income and the prices you face, you could just buy yourself a pinball machine if you want. For only $24.50, you get a portable cassette recorder that you can carry wherever you go. After all, it only weighs 3 pounds. No 10,000 songs on the phone in your pocket, no Spotify. But cassettes are pretty light. You can carry a bunch. If you're having a heart attack, good news. That visit to the emergency room's a lot cheaper. The doctors will give you aspirin, but no clotbusters or stents or balloon angioplasty. None of those were available in 1973. Would you take the deal? Would you give up the new products and the quality improvements of the last 40 years for the chance to pay 1973 prices? And just to make it fair, let's assume no one else has a smartphone or Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat or Instagram either, so you're not alone on some kind of tech-free island while your friends are all playing with social media. If you're hesitating, and I think a lot of people would, maybe the PCE and other price indices accurately capture the change in your purchasing power over long periods of time. Paying 1973 prices for 1973 quality goods and services wouldn't make you 5 times richer. You might even be worse off. That means our measures of inflation and the change in our standard of living aren't off by little, they're off by a lot. The average American is almost certainly doing a lot better than the standard numbers suggest. Of course, how much stuff people can buy isn't close to all we care about. The motto of life isn't whoever has the most toys wins. And even if the typical American is in fact doing a lot better than the numbers suggest, this doesn't mean everyone has a carefree economic life. Even if the poor and the middle class have made progress over the last 30 to 40 years, you can still argue the rich should pay higher taxes than they do now. But I don't think our economic system is rigged or broken, or that the American dream is dead, or that we need to throw out the current system and try to say socialism. But I do think the status quo needs improvement. In the next episode, I'll suggest some ways how we might increase opportunity and human flourishing.
The other thing that you hear is that, this is the other picture I want to share. בעברית, quintile is חמישון?
Yes.
חמישון. So you take the entire population and you divide it into חמישון, 5 pieces, the top 20%, the next 20%, the middle 20%, the lower 20%, and the bottom 20%. This is data in America. It's corrected for inflation. I think that correction is wrong, but that's the best you can do, even though I think it understates the gains. But look what this picture says. People look at this picture, they do a version of this picture all the time in America. What does it show? It shows that the rich got richer and everybody else either got ahead a little bit or didn't get ahead. So the bottom is flat. The next one is flat. The middle is a little higher, but basically flat. The upper 20%, the red line is a little higher, but the yellow line, the top 20%, all the gains are up there. That's where all the progress has been made, according to this picture. It's very disturbing. It's a very depressing picture. If it's accurate, it says that even though the economy has done very well, all the gains have gone to the richest people and not the average person. Everybody understand the picture? Now, the picture I showed you before was for individuals. This is for households, groups of people living together. There's some really serious problems with that kind of analysis, which you don't have time to go into. I have a different video about that. But I want to just focus on this picture because you see versions of this all the time in the United States that suggest that the economy is rigged, that the only people benefiting are the rich and everyone else is just, we say in English, treading water, just staying in place, not making any progress. The problem is that that's not what this picture shows. How this picture is generated, the analysis behind the picture is that in each year, they take the top 20%, the next 20%, the next chamishon, the next chamishon, the next chamishon. Then they do it again in 1981 and in 1982 and in 1983, all the way forward to 2014. So if we compare 2014 to 1980, it looks like the people at the top got all the gains. But guess what? They're not the same people in the picture. They're not the same people. It's different people each time. People move up and down. So I want to show you a different video to try to capture that. In other words, maybe we don't have time to show this one, Hannah. Maybe we'll show this later. But here's what the point I want to make. This chart could mean that the people at the top got all the gains. But that's not how it's constructed. It's not how it's created. What it actually means is that the richest 20% today are richer than the 20% who were at the top in 1980. So who are the richest people today? Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos wasn't doing anything in 1980. He's not one of the people who got richer. He was at the bottom. He was barely born in 1980. He was a teenager. So actually, I want to try to show this video if that's okay. We're going to try again. I don't know.
Okay, go ahead.
Here we go.
You've probably seen a picture like this before. Incomes corrected for inflation, measuring how much stuff people can buy and how that changes over time. The rich get richer, and the poor get poorer, and the middle class barely gets ahead. But when someone says the rich get richer, what does that really mean? It could mean that the richest people in 1980 were 50% richer by 2014. The poor people of 1980 never got a raise. And as for the middle class, they got crumbs, a crummy 10% gain over 34 years. The studies that use numbers like these create a lot of outrage, and reasonably so. It sure looks like the rich get all the gains from economic growth. It's why Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz can claim that the U.S. economy is rigged in favor of the rich. Why Nobel laureate Paul Krugman can say wages for ordinary workers have been stagnant since the 1970s. And why New York Times columnist David Leonard can say that the very affluent and only the very affluent have received significant raises in recent decades. This picture doesn't actually tell you that. Almost all the gloomy evidence that people use showing the rich getting all the gains, like this chart, take a snapshot each year and compare the snapshot today with one from the past to see how people have been doing. But it's not the same people in the snapshots. The economy is dynamic. People move up and down. They have good years and bad ones. People leave school, start working. people retired. Some died. Some of the people in the top 20% today weren't rich to start with. Some of the people at the top today weren't even born in 1980, like NBA superstar Stephen Curry or Google founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin. Some of the ones in the middle today used to be at the top. So it isn't necessarily true that the rich got richer. Maybe the people in the past who weren't rich became rich, and they ended up richer than the rich who were rich yesterday. So they show up in the snapshot of the top 20% in 2014 because they're richer today than the rich people of the past. It looks like the rich captured all the gains. Same with the poor falling behind. Maybe those who are poor now are younger and less skilled than the poor of the past. That will make it look like poor people are losing ground. But maybe the poor of the past actually got ahead and aren't poor anymore, and today's poor will get ahead too. So which story's right? Who's prospered in America? Just the rich? Or has prosperity been widely shared? To answer those questions, you can't use a series of snapshots. You need to follow the same people over time, like a movie.
So the key point here is that instead of looking at whoever's in the workforce in 1980 or 1990 or 2000 or 2014, let's take the people at a point in time and follow them over time and see how they do. Do the rich get all the gains if we actually look at and follow the same people? Here we go.
Do that, you find that a good chunk of the gains go to the poor and the middle class. Sometimes the rich are the ones whose incomes are stuck in place or falling. A Brookings study by Julia Isaacs for the Pew Foundation looked at how people did as grown-ups compared to their parents. What happened to kids whose parents were in the bottom 20% with median income of just over $20,000? When those kids entered the workforce, did they make more than their parents, or were they stuck in place making no progress? It turns out they did a lot better.
So in this study, they looked at the children who grew up in the bottom quintile, the bottom chamishon. How did they do? Their parents were poor. How did the children do? Were they poor also? No. They did a lot better than their parents.
As well in absolute terms. The kids who grew up in the richest households, the top 20% whose parents had median income of $100,000, ended up with the same income as their parents. The children who grew up in the middle made 27% more than their parents. The poorest children had the biggest absolute and percentage gains when they grew up. That's partly due to what's called regression to the mean. If your parents had bad luck, and that's part of the reason they ended up poor, you're more likely to have average luck and do better. Similarly, if your parents are rich, partly because they had especially good luck, you're not as likely to have good luck yourself, so you're not as likely to do as well as they did. But that doesn't change the reality that over the last 3 decades of the 20th century, kids from poor families gained more ground relative to their parents than kids from richer families. In the gloomy pictures, there's no regression to the mean. Only the rich make progress and everyone else is treading water. But it's not true. The passage of time narrowed the gaps between the top and the bottom. Here's a different study that follows the same people over time. Using tax data, it looks at people 35 to 40 years old in 1987 and the percentage change in their income 20 years later. The biggest percentage gains? The people who started in the lowest quintile. Their income doubled over the 20 years, just as it did in the Brookings study. The people who started in the middle quintile gained 27%, just like in the Brookings study. And the people who were in the top quintile in 1987 were actually 5% worse off 20 years later. In a recent working paper, Yonatan Berman of the Paris School of Economics and the London Mathematical Laboratory found that in recent decades, the poorest workers were more likely to gain income than the richest ones in the aftermath of a recession or a recovery. I asked them to look at a longer period of time and to look at how young workers have done over time as their careers advance. Did the young people who start off at the top get all the gains as they grow older, or did the rest of the workforce also see substantial progress? This is labor income for young workers in 1980. It's averaged over a 4-year period to reduce measurement error and transitory effects. It excludes taxes, government payments, and income from investments. It only measures the money you earn from working, how the economy rewards you. Let's follow the young people who were at the bottom in 1980 and see what happened to their incomes toward the end of their careers, 32 years later, corrected for inflation. How'd they do? Some stayed at the bottom. Others moved up to higher quintiles over time. What was the median income for that same group of people 3 decades later? It more than doubled. Let's do that for each group of young workers in 1980. Follow each group for 3 decades and see how they ended up doing over their career.
So when you follow the same people over time, everybody is sharing in economic growth. It's not the picture that we saw in that first picture where only the rich get the gains. You might not like it that the poor only get $18,000 extra to go from 14 to 32. And remember, this is corrected for inflation. So this is the purchasing power, the amount of things that people are able to buy has more than doubled for the poorest people after the passage of 30 years. So those other pictures get a very different picture than this one.
The people from the top 2 quintiles in 1980 did very well, but the people who were in the bottom 60% in 1980 also made steady progress over their working lives. The rich weren't the only ones getting healthy raises, and these numbers understate the absolute gains. They don't include fringe benefits, which are much larger today than in the past. The bottom line, snapshots of quintiles produce gloom and doom. All the same people, it's a lot sunnier. The portrait of the American economy from the snapshots isn't telling the whole story. People across the economy have been getting raises, and they're pretty large. Of course, it's not all sunshine, even when you follow the same people over time. Not everyone has an equal chance to get to the top. In all these studies, the richest Americans were still sitting pretty as time passed. People from all parts of the income distribution are getting ahead. They don't easily get ahead of people who start out ahead of them. And these results don't justify the status quo. There's plenty to fix. Too many cronies get special treatment from the government, and there's too little opportunity for the least skilled among us. You can still argue there's too much inequality, if that's your concern. But the economy isn't rigged to favor just the rich. The poor and the middle class have made progress. The death of the American dream is greatly exaggerated.
Okay, so the point of that video is, again, not to say, oh, everything's great. It's just that the most pessimistic and disturbing pictures that you see, I think, are distorting what has actually happened. Let me finish up and then we'll take some questions. You can still argue, even after my critique, my criticism of the standard analysis, you can still argue that we need higher taxes. You could argue that I've been very lucky. I have a very good standard of living. Is it really my doing? Do I deserve what I have? I was very lucky. I was born in America. I was not born in Vietnam or someplace with a great amount of poverty. I was born in a very good time. I was born today where the internet allows me to reach millions of people I couldn't otherwise reach. Most of all, I had wonderful parents. I have wonderful parents. I was raised by wonderful parents. They gave me a great start in life. Does that mean I deserve what I have? You can argue, who knows? Maybe not. And I've written a set of articles on this. I'll send out to you via Hananel or Bob, and you can read more about this if you want. The real question, though, is, should taxes be higher, and for what reason, and what will they achieve? So, for example, Bernie Sanders, the candidate most aligned with the socialist viewpoint in the United States over the last 10 years, he said, why don't we tax Bill Gates? Let's take $100 billion from him, and then we could end homelessness, people who don't have any place to live, and we could give everyone safe drinking water, and Bill would still have a lot of money. Bill Gates, after we took $100 billion from him, he'd still have a lot of money. And Bernie Sanders says, so therefore, we should take away money from Bill Gates and spend it to help the poor. And my response to that is, $100 billion seems like a lot of money. But could you use it to end homelessness? Would it? Do we know how to spend money to end the problem of people who live on the street in America? In America, many of the people who live on the street have issues of mental health. It's not just a problem of money. It's not just a problem. It won't necessarily solve the problem. And if it could, why haven't we done it already? The US government last year spent $4.4 trillion. $4.4 trillion. What Bernie Sanders is saying, if we'd only spent 4.5, then we could have solved homelessness. And my question is, why haven't you solved it already? Couldn't we spend a little bit less on defense, a little bit less on helping farmers who are rich, a little bit less helping Wall Street? What's the argument for government being $100 billion bigger if it doesn't solve the problem now? And just as a footnote, you know, we've spent about $2 trillion over the last 50 years trying to fight world poverty. And where has world poverty gone down the most? China and India. Not because of foreign aid, not because of payments, but because they changed their economic system to allow more freedom, to allow more enterprise, to allow markets to work. So I'm going to close with one thing, and then I'll take questions. On Monday, we talked about flourishing, pricha enoshit. I would think that is what truly counts. Inequality is not the thing we should be worried about. I'm more worried not about the fact, I'm more worried about people who can't get ahead, who can't make progress, who don't get good education. Let's focus on that rather than trying to redistribute money through the government that does not do a particularly good job of solving problems. There are other ways, as I suggested on Monday, to solve problems. And let us keep our eye on what matters, which is dignity, self-respect, kavod atzmi, because I think that is what we should be helping people achieve. Thank you, folks. Okay, questions?
I have a question about what you said about inflation. It was new to me. I didn't hear that idea before, that we take inflation as granted if it says we have a 2 or 3% inflation a year. So that's what it means. And your video kind of messed up with that idea in my head. So I wanted to ask you if we have a better way to measure inflation, or maybe we have an alternative measure, or how do we actually measure it? I'll ask a particular question. If I'm trying to think about giving my kid, marry my kid is 3 years old, they say, okay, in 20 years, I want to marry him, so not to marry him, to help him get married.
Yeah.
So I know that the, let's say, S&P 500, that makes you a 10% gain a year, approximately, on average. But if inflation is like 7%, it's 3%, so it actually makes 7% by average. You say that isn't a good measure. And my question is, do you have any alternative or any different idea how can we measure?
Sure. Let me make a side comment, which if I were there, we would talk about a lot at lunch and dinner, because I'm very interested in this, which is, as economists, we like to measure things. And data are very important. Measuring things is important, but there are many things in life that are important that we can't measure. And the usual economist response is, well, we'll just do better. We'll make it better. So is there a better way to measure inflation? Yeah, there is. You can try to control for the quality changes that I mentioned and that we all know are true, say about your smartphone or the car. I mean, the car today compared to 1973 is, so think about it this way. A Honda Civic, which is a nice car, very reliable, in 1973 was about $2,000. Today it's about $20,000, so it's 10 times more expensive. So if your income goes up 10 times, that says that you're no better off. But we know you are better off because that Honda you get today is so much better than the Honda you got in 1973. It's got anti-lock brakes, it has an airbag, it gets Waze, it doesn't break as often, it gets better gas mileage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's safer, more reliable. So how do you correct for that? Well, there are fancy, complicated ways to try to correct for it, and some measures of inflation try to correct for quality changes, and they do the best they can. But then you start to think about so much of our life today is so much more complicated than just, oh, the quality is higher. I mean, the example I like to use is that, and I got this, I think I got this from Brad DeLong, I'm not sure, but suppose you were the richest person in 1500, okay? You're a king. You're a king 500 years ago. You're a king. You're the richest person in the country. And you're going to take a trip into the countryside. And you want music. How do you get music in 1500? You bring some musicians. You have 6 musicians travel with you. They've got their instruments, their violins, and their other instruments. And how many songs can you hear? Well, depends how many songs they know. They might know 25 songs. Wouldn't that be great? And only the king could travel with it, right? The king's in his carriage. The horses are taking him along. And he's got next to him another carriage that has the musicians. Or maybe they're in the carriage with him and they're playing music. So he gets music on his trip. You know what I have on my trip today? I'm not the richest man. I'm not the king. I have Spotify. 40 million songs. 40 million. I pay $10 a month for Spotify and I have 40 million songs. How do you correct for that? If the king has a toothache, you know what they do? They take a pair of pliers, a piece of metal, and they yank his tooth out, and he often dies from an infection. I don't die. I don't have pain. I get a shot to reduce the pain. I get penicillin or amoxicillin or some antibiotic so I don't get an infection. I am so much richer than a king in 1500. How do you measure that? It's almost impossible. Now, we don't have to measure it. You know that you wouldn't want to be the king in 1500 unless you wanted to have a lot of wives. If that's the only thing you care about, being a king or a queen, maybe it was okay. But other than that, being the richest person in the past was horrible compared to an average person today. There's no comparison. Then you add in things like Google, that I can look up stuff that I'm interested in, that you can listen to 50 podcasts without having to pay a penny compared to education in the past. Education in the past, only a handful of people could be educated. Now, anyone can be educated. You can get on YouTube, you can listen to podcasts, and there's no charge. How do you control for that? How do you use that to measure inflation accurately? It's impossible. Can't be done. So that's over any length of time, 40 years, 20 years even, when there's strong amounts of technological change. So my answer is, you can try to do a little bit better, but fundamentally, it's very hard to measure the transformation of our standard of living in any way. And I do want to emphasize, very important, stuff, goods, things, they're not the only thing we care about. We care about so much more than that. So I don't want to suggest that all we should care about is whether the average person has a higher standard of living. It's important. It's not irrelevant, but it's not the only thing. It's not close to the only thing. Money is not the goal of life. And that comes back to my point on Monday. We spend so much time focusing on what we can measure and not enough on what's important. You know the famous story, a person comes back from a party and he can't find his car keys, the keys for his car. So he's on his hands and knees, he's looking around under the street light. And a person comes along to help him. And they look and they look and they can't find the keys. And finally the person who's helping said, "Are you sure that you lost them here?" And the person says, "Oh, I didn't lose them here, but this is where the light is good." And that's the problem I think we often have. We look where the light is. In the case of standard of living, we spend so much time as economists focusing on whether the average person is doing a little bit better, a lot better, somewhat better, and not enough on what really matters, which is whether people have a chance to to use their gifts, to dream, to follow opportunity. That's what we ought to be focusing on. And I think we spend too much time trying to precisely measure things that are very difficult to measure precisely. Let me say something about the minimum wage being constant, earlier question, and then I'll take another one to comment on. So the minimum wage is a very attractive way to help poor people. And I think it's the wrong way to help poor people. I think it does a very bad job. It makes poor people more expensive. It says to an employer, if you want to hire someone, you have to pay them at least this amount. But what if your talent, what if your skills are not worth that amount? Then you have no work. So there's a big debate in economics about whether the minimum wage destroys jobs, how many, whether it maybe doesn't destroy jobs. There's studies that show it doesn't have much of an effect. There's studies that show it has a big effect. And you can find, there are plenty of studies on both sides. I think it has an effect, but either way, it's the wrong way to give people help. The better way is to give them skills so that they have more choices, so that they're more productive, so they're more attractive to an employer, not artificially giving them a higher wage that actually makes them more expensive to the employer. It's the wrong way. They can't get started. So again, I want to emphasize, in the United States, the two biggest problems that we have for poor people are the education system, they get bad schools. And secondly, we have a lot of restrictions on what you can do in the workplace. In many jobs in America, I don't know if it's true in Israel, you need a special license. And those licenses are often just to keep people out from competing with the people who already have jobs in that area. It's a terrible thing. So it's the wrong way to help people. Okay, another question. And by the way, I should just tell everybody, I've written many, many essays on this question of how the numbers are measuring progress. So if you want to read them, I can send links to them and you can take more time. I know it's hard to follow the video in English, it's very fast. Okay, next question.
Hi, my name is Emil. I wanted to address the graph that you presented earlier. Can you please address the relatively steep slope that we saw during the Clinton years compared to maybe any other period out there? And that's one. Two, can you please specify how you corrected the 2008 financial crisis in that graph and why we don't see a very prominent effect of it? Maybe we saw it and I just forgot, but I think we did.
That's a good question. You're referring, I think, hang on one sec. You can see up here, I don't know if you can see in 2008, you'll see that the rich took a little bit of a hit in 2008, and everyone else took just a little hit. It goes down a little bit for each group, but it's not very large. These are the data. These are not, I don't like this picture myself, but that's the standard picture you see. I think, I don't know what else to say about that, actually. What was your first question?
About the Clinton years.
The Clinton years.
Oh, right. There's a terrible temptation to assume that everything that good happens when the president is in office is due to the president. Or if you like the president in America, anything good happens, it's he did it. If you don't like the president, anything good happens, oh, that was because of something else. And then anything bad happens if you don't like the president, oh, that was his fault. But the president has a very limited effect on the economy. You can make a very bad mistake. You can do some very stupid things, and the president can ruin the economy. But I don't give the president, President Trump, until the coronavirus, had a very good economy. He also had a very good stock market. And he likes to point to the stock market to show that he's doing a good job. It's not good evidence. It's evidence that the large corporations in America are doing well. That's not necessarily true that it's good sign that the President Trump is doing a good job. And similarly, the economy itself, the economy is 330 million people doing their thing, working, creating, investing, managing, not the president. So You know, some good things happened during the Clinton years and some not so good things. I don't give him credit or blame. A lot of it has nothing to do with him, but there's a temptation to always to attribute things to the president if you like him or not like him.
So just to make sure, it's just a coincidence for that matter that between the 92 and 2000 years, the 2000 exactly, we saw the slope stick, but afterwards we didn't, and before that we didn't. So it's just
well, actually, hang on. So you're talking about the fact that between 1992 and 2000, when Clinton was president, there were some good times, right?
It's pretty
for the richest people. Do you want to conclude that Clinton only liked the rich?
No, I'm just asking why.
Why? I don't know why. It could be many reasons. By the way, it also did pretty well from 1980 to 1989.
Yeah, that's the Reagan. Right.
That was Reagan. I don't know. He gets some credit, but I don't think it's his doing. And in particular, I think this is a really important point. Let me hang on. This is a very deep point. The world is a complicated place. More than one thing is happening at the same time. Okay, let's take an example from today. How is the United States doing with respect to the coronavirus? Is the United States doing a good job or a bad job? Is President Trump doing a good job or a bad job? Is Bibi Netanyahu doing a good job or a bad job? So people who like, let's say people who don't like President Trump or don't like Netanyahu, they'll say, well, look, they're doing horrible. They're doing worse than almost every country. But there's so many other things that are happening besides how the president decided public policy. And by the way, I don't think President Trump's done a very good job, but it's not because you can't use the fact that there are 180,000 people dead in the United States from coronavirus. That is not evidence that President Trump has done a good job. Again, let me make it clear. I think the president, if in April he had come to a press conference like this, I think it would have saved some lives. It would have been a good thing. I think he could have done a better job as a leader. I think he could have made it easier to do tests. There are many things that Trump could have done that he didn't do well. And that's true of every leader in every country. Netanyahu, Boris Johnson, Macron in France. They've all had a very mixed experience. But the point I want to emphasize is you don't want to say, well, we know President Trump did a bad job. How do you know? Well, 180,000 people are dead. But you have to control for the other factors. The United States is an obese country. How do you say obese, bivrit? Another word? Fat. There are a lot of fat people in America. Coronavirus is very bad for fat people. We also have a lot of old people. And a lot of people who are old have died from coronavirus. They would have died if the president did a great job, because we didn't understand at first that old people were very vulnerable. In New York, thousands of people tragically died because they sent them back to nursing homes where they spread the disease to other older people. It was a mistake. They didn't know. It's not stupidity. It's just bad luck. We didn't understand it. But there's so many things that affect let me say one more thing. A lot of people talk about lockdown as a measure of how the virus has been handled. But whether the government locks down or not, people locked down before the government did anything. Here in the United States, if you can follow cell phone data and see that people moved around a lot less. So if the 1990s were good years, it could be something Clinton did. The 1980s could be something Reagan did. But you can't just look at the outcome and say, oh, it must be them. Because there's oil prices, and there's technology, there's education, there's immigration. We had a huge amount of immigration in the United States in the 90s that I think was a good idea. Not everybody agrees, but it's very important when you're trying to understand how the world works and what policies are good versus not good, to remember that there's more than one thing happening, and you don't want to just look at two variables. It's complicated, so hard to remember. Plus, we all have biases. We all have things that we like to think. And if we're not careful, those biases overwhelm us and we forget about the other factors. And we just say, oh, well, it was President Clinton did a great job, or President Reagan did a great job. But we don't know. You have to look much more carefully and try to control for other things. Let me give you one other example. In a lot of the studies that are done on standard of living in the United States, like the ones we've looked at today, some of them include old people, people in their 70s and 80s who are working 5 hours a week, 10 hours a week, an hour. They're not full-time workers. If you add their income in, you're going to get a very different effect of how the economy is doing, and that will not be accurate. One more example. You know what the biggest social change in the United States is since 1973 that people forget about? There's been an enormous increase in divorce, an enormous decrease in marriage. So we have a lot more households that have one person, either an old person who's a widow, whose husband or wife has passed away, or a young person who hasn't gotten married yet. And as a result, if you look at the median household, there's so many more one-person households down in the left-hand tail that it's going to pull the median household income down, even if the economy is doing great. And I have a whole video on that too to show how that intuition works. But my point is that, between 1973 and say 2000, household income changed. One of the reasons it changed is because households are different. If you don't control for that, you're not measuring the same thing. You're not comparing the right thing to the right thing. Anyway, so sorry for that long speech. People say, how did the Great Depression end? And people say, well, it's because of the war. World War II ended the Great Depression. It stimulated the economy. I think that's ridiculous. I think that's a horrible argument. And I can give you some evidence that it's a horrible argument. You might not agree. Maybe you think it's the war. But when I say what I say, when I say it's not the war, people say to me, well, if it's not the war, what was it? Like, where's the one thing? It's got to be one thing. Our brains are very limited. We're always looking for one thing. It's often 10 things. Next question.
Hello. Thank you very much for the interesting lecture. I wanted to ask about, you talked before about inequality, and I believe that what the government's job regarding this, and I believe that the government shouldn't cause, complete equality, because then no one will have an incentive to work hard. But I wanted to ask about higher education. In America, it's very expensive, and in Israel, there are a lot of subsidies, and I think that maybe since in America it's very expensive, then people don't have equality of opportunities, and I think that equality of opportunities is pretty important. So I want to hear your opinion about it. Thank you.
Great question. So equality of opportunity is very important. Here's the problem. More people go to college now than ever before. So the financial cost in America, the financial cost is not the barrier. Now, it's also true that part of the reason so many people go to college in America today is that they can borrow money, they can get loans, they can have debt, loans, borrowed money to afford college. Then they get out and they find out that they don't have enough money easily to pay off their loans. And that's a huge problem. But incredibly, more people go to college now than ever before. But here's the other problem. So one problem is, yeah, they do go, but it's very expensive and they get a lot of debt and loans to pay it off, and it's very hard for them afterward. But the second issue is a lot of them go but don't graduate. And if you go to college but don't graduate, you don't get a higher income from having attended college. You only get the higher income mainly from finishing, from sending a signal to employers that you're able to finish. So it also depends on what you study. So if you study so-called STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, you make a lot of money when you get out of college. But not everyone can study those things. They're very hard. The ability to study those is limited. So I think it's a terrible mistake in America. I'm not going to speak about Israel because I don't know. But in America, the idea that everyone should go to college and that's how we're going to do better is not necessarily true, especially if you study the wrong things. Let me say one other thing about the subsidy. It's highly subsidized in the United States, even though it's very expensive. The actual price that people pay is much lower than what's listed in the catalog. Okay, so the so-called list price, the number that's written on the website when you go to look up the tuition, the actual number is actually a lot lower because they give people scholarships, extra money. So, but it is expensive, and it's not as cheap as in Israel. It's much more expensive for Americans to go to college. They still go, but it is expensive. The question is, who benefits from all the money that goes into college? So in America, we have what are called state universities, University of Michigan, UCLA, University of California, Berkeley, University of Missouri, University of Maryland. These are all very good universities. They're highly discounted for people who live in those states. Who gets the benefit from that discount? Well, mostly rich people, unfortunately. The rich people are the ones who go to college and who stay and who graduate. So subsidizing college through the state university system, it's not that effective. And I would guess that's probably true in Israel. My guess is that if you went to, say, Hebrew University, Tel Aviv University, Technion, Shalem, all the colleges that you've gone to, and asked, do the people or your classmates coming from the poorest people or the richest people? Now, some of them are the poorest, and that's wonderful, but a lot of them are not the poorest. They're people who could afford to pay more, but the system is designed to take care of them. The other person that benefits is me, the teachers. We get a huge benefit from the increase in demand by subsidizing college. You know, I didn't talk about this, but you know, one of the reasons my salary is high, the reason I have a high standard of living, is because there's a big demand for economists. Why is there a big demand for economists? Are we so useful? Besides the Friedberg Economics Institute, where else can we be useful? Well, we're useful on Wall Street in investment banking. There are a lot of economists get hired there to try to help make them more money. And the United States government has subsidized Wall Street, I believe, through bailing out bad investments and maybe through the Federal Reserve. That's helped me. It's a terrible thing. It's bad. It's not right. To attract me into college for Stanford and other universities to attract economists to teach, you're in competition with Wall Street. So I'm helped by Wall Street indirectly, which I'm ashamed of. I don't like that. I think that's wrong. I don't think that salary is earned and well-deserved. It's a problem. Okay, sorry. Next question.
Hi, Russ. Thank you for your time. The title of this session was Making the Case for Socialism. Now, I might have missed it, but I don't think you made the case for socialism. So if forced to, in 2 minutes now, I'm not going to force you, but if forced to, could you please in 2 minutes make the case for socialism?
Sure. So great question. So I put that title in for Bob Borens. Is Bob in the back there? I just wanted to make Bob nervous. You know, I just, but the truth is, I did try to make the case. I'm gonna make two cases for socialism again. I mentioned them both, and I think they're relevant. They have to be taken seriously. And I have a 3-part essay series at medium.com where I take this very seriously, where I argue I don't deserve what I have. I'm very lucky. I have worked hard, but maybe I work hard because my parents encouraged me, the way they raised me, my genetics. Should I really get credit for the fact that I work hard? I don't know. But those are the wrong questions. The real question is if we move to socialism, so you can make an argument that I don't deserve what I have. But then you need to also make the argument that changing the current system will make the world better for everybody, for poor people especially, for middle income people. If government gets a lot bigger, if we raise taxes on the rich and government gets a lot bigger, you have to make the case that government is going to spend that money wisely. It's not enough to say, well, I don't like the current system. You have to also show that the current system's imperfect. It's not great, although over time it works pretty well, right? Over time, the transformation of humanity in monetary terms, again, money is not all we care about. But if we want to evaluate the economic system called capitalism in the United States, where I understand it the best, it's been a pretty good system. It's taken hundreds of millions of people and made them better off in terms of material money well-being. Same is true in China. China has opened up their economy, has a lot more private ownership, a lot more incentives, a lot more capitalism. It also has a lot more state control, so it's complicated, not the only thing happening. But they've transformed the standard of living of their people through, I think, mostly, not only, but mostly through expanding opportunity for people to start businesses, take risks, allowing them to make money. Those things have helped not just the people directly, but the other people. I don't think, it's a very important point. The world is not a zero-sum game. Zero sum. My gains don't come at your expense. Your gains don't come at my expense. Jeff Bezos, who started Amazon, is one of the wealthiest people in the world. He's incredibly successful financially. But the way he got successful was by giving people really inexpensive products that have made their lives better, that have given them more opportunity. So it's complicated. So there is a case for socialism. I want to care about more than just myself. I'd like to live in a world where we care about each other and I don't take advantage of you and you don't take advantage of me. I want to live in a world where you have the opportunity to use your skills and gifts. The question is, how do we get there? What makes us more likely to give people that opportunity to flourish, to have pricha enoshit? That's the question. And does that happen more in a capitalist system or in a socialist system? And for me, it's easy. I think it's more in a capitalist system. I think that leads over time to better outcomes, certainly on material things, but more than just material, more than just financial. In how we live our lives, our freedom to choose what we do, our freedom to have opportunity, our freedom to create, our freedom to innovate. I think those flourish and grow the most under economic freedom and are much harder to do in systems where the government has a lot more control. Capitalism is flawed. It's imperfect. Sometimes there's not enough competition. Sometimes people cheat. Sometimes there's dishonesty, of course. There's also fraud, dishonesty, and cheating when the government does things. So you have to compare the two systems in the real world, not real world capitalism versus the socialism that I could imagine, but the real world capitalism versus the real world socialism. And there, I think for me, I'm over on this side. But I don't want to suggest that there's no argument to be made. And in the essays that I mentioned on Medium, which I can share, I think that, you have to take it seriously as at least as something to strive for. Wouldn't it be a better world if we were less greedy? Sure, absolutely. Although greed does many good things too. But in general, I like a world that has more love in it and more kindness. It's a really good idea. But I don't think that's a capitalism, socialism problem. I think that's a human problem.
Okay. More question? Yeah, Atar. Russ, people feel that you have such a good answer, they want to clap. So.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I want to play the devil's advocate because I think it's a good exercise to be a critical thinker, and also it's quite similar to the previous question, you know, with the case for socialism. So,
100%.
So with what you said, I think like most professional economists who are on the left, their main criticism is that the wealth concentration has become more concentrated, and I'm especially talking about Piketty in his book Capital in the 21st Century, where he says that since the margin of returns on capital is higher than the growth rate of the economy, this creates a very small population of rich people that have a very large concentration of wealth. So my question is, are there any arguments that Piketty, for example, makes that you sympathize with, or you think are good arguments just in general? I'm just curious about your thoughts, and you know, maybe giving the benefits of the doubt and just hearing what you have to say about that.
Great question. So I interviewed him on Econ Talk. You can find it, just Google Econ Talk Piketty, and you can hear some of the things I asked him. There is a larger concentration of wealth, and I think there are two reasons for that. One of those reasons is good, and one is not good. So the good reason is that, you know, if you're, are there any basketball fans in the room? Any people follow American basketball? Raise your hand. I see one hand. Okay. So the best basketball player in the world right now, maybe, is LeBron James. He's getting a little old, but he's a very good basketball player. He's a very wealthy man. He's a lot wealthier than the best basketball player in 1980. The best basketball player in 1980 was either Magic Johnson or Larry Bird. Why is LeBron James wealthier than the people before? And that's mainly because of the internet. Fans in China can pay to enjoy watching American basketball in a way they couldn't do in 1980. So the world's a bigger place. If you're a great singer, if you're a great pop star, you make more today than you did in 1980 because you can sell to 7 billion people through Spotify and through concerts and other ways. If you're a great actor or actress, you can make a lot more money. And if you make a great app for the phone, you don't just sell to the people in your town, you sell to the people all over the world. It's an amazing, that's a beautiful thing. And that's one of the reasons that the wealthier get wealthier. That's a good reason, because these people can make more people happy. They can serve more customers. Then there are bad reasons that there's a concentration of wealth. You get a special deal from the government. You own a house and the government doesn't allow people to build houses. You get rich just because you bought a house 40, 20, 10 years ago. Nothing to do with your effort, nothing to do with your creativity. So I'm not going to say, and by the way, the other thing that people on the left worry about, which is a good thing to worry about, is the political power of the wealthy to influence politics. That's a bad thing. That's why I want to restrain what government can do so that the rich can't use government to protect themselves from other competitors. That's a mistake. So, you know, Piketty is interesting. I don't think his economics is correct. You know, I've tried to, you can hear again some of that in that interview, but he's right about the fundamental, there's two fundamental things he says. The wealthy are very wealthy right now relative to the past. And a lot of that wealth comes from property that's not productive, right? If I buy a house in San Francisco 20 years ago, I could be a millionaire now without having done anything. That's not a great system. And it keeps out people from living there, makes it harder for people to move there. And that's going to be true in Tel Aviv too, if we're not careful. So, you know, I think these are things to worry about. The question is, how do you fix them in ways that help make us, make the world better and not worse? And that's not easy. Folks, thanks for listening. It's great to talk to you. I so wish I could be there. And I want to thank Joe Friedberg for his support for this program, which is a wonderful thing. And God willing, I look forward to coming to Israel soon when the coronavirus goes down and maybe getting to talk to some of you in person at an alumni dinner. So have a great rest of the conference.